Alex stood near the counter at a crowded party, holding a drink that had long since lost its fizz. The chatter of voices and occasional bursts of laughter swirled around him, but none of it truly registered. He was here because his college friend, Jason, insisted this would be the event of the year. Still, he felt more like an outsider observing a world he wasn't sure he belonged to. Then, as if the room tilted slightly to draw his gaze, she walked in. Cindy's presence was magnetic. She wasn't the most traditionally beautiful person in the room, but there was something about her, an effortless charisma, the way she held herself with a confidence that didn't need validation. She wasn't loud or flashy, but people seemed to orbit around her, leaning in to catch her every word. Alex didn't realize he was staring until she caught his eye. For a split second, their gazes locked. She smiled, a quick, genuine flash of warmth, and then turned back to her group. That smile lingered in his mind like a ripple across water, impossible to ignore. You gonna stand there all night, or are you actually gonna talk to someone? Jason's voice jolted Alex out of his trance. Who's that? Alex asked, nodding toward Cindy. Jason followed his gaze. Ah, Cindy. She's kind of a force of nature. A little out of your league though, man. Alex ignored the jab. League or not, he found himself inching toward her side of the room, his feet moving before his mind could process what he was doing. By the time he reached her, he had no plan, no clever line, just an inexplicable pull toward this stranger who seemed to command the space without trying. Hi, he said awkwardly as she finished telling a story that had her small circle of friends laughing. She turned, her eyes locking onto his with a curiosity that made his chest tighten. Hi, I'm Alex, he offered, shifting his drink to his other hand. I couldn't help but notice you seem to be the most interesting person at this party. Her brow arched slightly, amused but not dismissive. You're just saying that because you don't know anyone else here. Fair point, he admitted, smiling. From that simple exchange, the conversation flowed naturally. Alex discovered that Cindy wasn't just charismatic, she was magnetic. She spoke about everything with an intensity that made even mundane topics feel alive. Whether it was her recent road trip through the Southwest or her half-formed dream of starting her own business, she spoke with a passion that was contagious. And Alex listened, truly listened, in a way he hadn't with anyone else before. The more she talked, the more he found himself drawn to her. It wasn't just her energy, it was the way she made him feel like he was the only person in the room. By the end of the night, they were sitting on a worn-out couch in the corner, the party fading into the background. She teased him about his clumsy attempt to approach her earlier, and he countered with a story about his disastrous first day at work. They laughed, shared secrets that felt too personal for first meetings, and by the time the lights dimmed, Alex felt like he'd known her for years. Before they parted ways, Cindy scribbled her number on a napkin and handed it to him. Call me, she said, her voice soft but certain. Their relationship unfolded with the same intensity as their first meeting. Alex found himself constantly amazed by Cindy's zest for life. She introduced him to things he never would have considered, spontaneous weekend trips, trying every food truck in the city, late-night stargazing sessions where they'd lie on the hood of her car and talk until the sun threatened to rise. It wasn't long before they decided to move in together. For Alex, the decision was both thrilling and terrifying. Cindy had a way of challenging him, pushing him out of his comfort zone while making him feel safe in the process. Their first apartment was tiny, barely big enough for two people, but it didn't matter. They filled it with laughter, arguments over who forgot to take the trash out, and dreams whispered into the early hours of the morning. Cindy's presence transformed the space into something magical, a sanctuary where Alex felt more alive than he ever had before. But there was an undercurrent of tension too, moments when Cindy's energy felt overwhelming, almost suffocating. She could be demanding, expecting Alex to match her relentless pace, and when he couldn't, her disappointment was palpable. Alex, in turn, struggled with his own insecurities, wondering if he could truly keep up with someone like her. Still, despite the cracks that began to show, they clung to the connection that had drawn them together. For Alex, Cindy wasn't just a partner, she was a force that had upended his life in the best possible way. And for Cindy, Alex was the grounding presence she didn't realize she needed. Their life together was far from perfect, but it was theirs. And for now, that was enough. The crisp air bit at Alex's cheeks as he adjusted the strap of his backpack. The mountain trail stretched out before them, a winding path bordered by towering pine trees that seemed to touch the sky. It was late autumn, the kind of season where the leaves blazed with vibrant reds and oranges, and the ground was carpeted with a crunching layer of fallen foliage. Alex's heart pounded harder with each step, though it wasn't from the altitude or the exertion of the climb. Today was the day. After 3 years with Cindy, he was going to propose. It had taken him weeks to plan this moment. Cindy had always loved the mountains, calling them her cathedrals of freedom. She said they reminded her of how small yet significant people could be, a paradox she often brought up when they talked about life late into the night. It seemed only fitting to propose here, where she felt the most alive. But Alex's confidence was fraying with every passing second. He felt the small velvet box in his jacket pocket, its weight far heavier than it should have been. What if she said no? What if this wasn't what she wanted? Cindy was a whirlwind of ambition and adventure, and though she loved him, he sometimes felt like an anchor tethering her to a life she wasn't ready for. "Hey," Cindy called out from ahead, snapping him out of his thoughts. She turned, her face flushed from the cold and the hike, her hair a wild mess under her beanie. "You're falling behind, slowpoke?" Alex forced a grin. "Just taking in the view." She rolled her eyes, but her smile was teasing. "The view's better up here. Come on." She turned and continued up the trail, her movements as confident and effortless as ever. Alex followed, trying to quiet the doubts swirling in his mind. This was Cindy. If there was anyone who made him feel like he could take on the world, it was her. And he wanted her to know that he'd be by her side for whatever came next, no matter how terrifying that might be. The summit was breathtaking. A vast expanse of rolling hills and jagged peaks stretched out before them, cloaked in the muted golds and deep greens of autumn. Cindy stood at the edge of the overlook, her arms outstretched as if she could embrace the entire landscape. Her laughter echoed against the rocks, a sound that always managed to cut through Alex's worries. "This is amazing," she said, spinning to face him. "How did you even find this place?" Alex shrugged, trying to play it cool. "A little research. Thought you'd like it?" "Like it? I love it." She walked back toward him, her eyes shining with a joy that made Alex's chest ache. "Thanks for bringing me here. You're the best." Alex swallowed hard. It was now or never. "Cindy," he began, his voice rough with nerves. She stopped, tilting her head at him curiously. "There's something I need to say." She frowned slightly, taking a step closer. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. Better than fine, actually." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the small box. His hands shook as he held it out to her, and he dropped to one knee before he could second-guess himself. Cindy's eyes widened, and her hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. I know you like things big and dramatic, but I'm just going to say this as simply as I can." His voice cracked, but he pushed on. "You've changed my life in ways I didn't think were possible. You challenge me, you push me, and you make me want to be better every single day. I love you, Cindy, more than I've ever loved anything in my life. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you." He opened the box to reveal the ring. It wasn't extravagant, a simple gold band with a modest diamond, but he had spent months saving for it, knowing Cindy would value the thought and effort more than the price tag. For a moment, there was only silence. Cindy stared at him, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. Alex's stomach dropped. Was this a mistake? Was he reading her all wrong? Then she let out a shaky laugh and dropped to her knees in front of him, her tears spilling over. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Of course, yes." Relief and joy surged through Alex, and he slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands. She held it up, examining it with a watery smile, before throwing her arms around him. They stayed like that for a long time, the wind whipping around them as the mountains bore silent witness to their promise. On the hike back down, Cindy couldn't stop staring at her hand. She kept wiggling her fingers, watching the light catch the diamond, and laughing like she couldn't quite believe it. "Okay, I have to ask," she said, breaking the comfortable silence. Did Jason know about this? Alex groaned. Of course he did. I needed advice, and he wouldn't let me hear the end of it. Cindy smirked. I bet he told you to propose during a football game or something equally awful. Actually, he suggested karaoke night. She burst out laughing, the sound echoing through the trees. Alex couldn't help but join in, his earlier anxiety melting away with every step. But as they reached the base of the trail and the parking lot came into view, a pang of insecurity crept back into Alex's chest. Cindy was radiant, her joy unmistakable, but he couldn't shake the nagging thought that he might not be enough for her. He wasn't adventurous or ambitious like she was. What if she grew bored of him? What if, years down the line, she realized she'd settled for someone who couldn't keep up with her? He glanced at her as she climbed into the car, still beaming as she admired the ring. You okay? She asked, catching his look. Alex hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, just really happy. She smiled softly and reached over to squeeze his hand. Me too. As they drove away from the mountains, Alex tried to silence his doubts. Cindy had said yes. She had chosen him. For now, that was enough. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning of their story, a story that would be as challenging and unpredictable as the trails they'd hiked that day. And Alex could only hope he was ready for the journey ahead. Alex sat on the couch, leafing through the seating arrangements for the wedding as the soft hum of the television played in the background. The big day was only 2 days away, and though he wouldn't admit it, his nerves were starting to get to him. He wanted everything to be perfect for Cindy, a day that matched her energy and joy. Cindy appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with a small, hesitant smile. She was already dressed to go out, her outfit more casual than her usual flair but still effortlessly stylish. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, and her makeup was minimal, the kind of look Alex always found beautiful in its simplicity. Hey, she said, her tone almost cautious. Alex glanced up from the papers in his lap, immediately catching the odd note in her voice. Hey yourself. What's up? She stepped into the room and perched on the arm of the couch, her fingers fiddling with a loose thread on her sleeve. So, the girls are throwing a party tonight. You know, like a pre-wedding thing. They're calling it a freedom celebration. She rolled her eyes, clearly not a fan of the term. Alex chuckled. A freedom celebration? Sounds like a retirement party, right? She laughed, but it was brief, almost forced. Anyway, they're pretty insistent that I come. I wasn't sure at first, but I think it could be fun. Just a low-key night out before everything gets crazy. Alex nodded, setting the seating chart aside. Of course. You should go. It's your last chance to let loose before the chaos. Cindy hesitated, her fingers still pulling at the thread. You're okay with it? I mean, I don't have to go if it's going to make you uncomfortable or anything. Alex gave her a soft smile, reaching for her hand to still her nervous movements. Cindy, I trust you. We're getting married in 2 days. If there's anyone in the world I don't have to worry about, it's you. Her smile widened, and she squeezed his hand. Thanks, Alex. I just didn't want you to think I was running off or anything. Go, he urged, waving her toward the door. Have fun. I'll be here obsessing over whether Uncle Greg should sit near Aunt Linda. She laughed, leaning down to kiss him on the forehead before grabbing her purse. Don't wait up, okay? I might be late. Noted, he said with a grin, watching as she left the apartment. As the door clicked shut behind her, Alex turned back to the seating chart, unaware of the knot that had started to form in the pit of his stomach. The party was louder than Cindy had anticipated. What was supposed to be a simple gathering with her closest friends had quickly spiraled into something far more chaotic, thanks to her maid of honor, Brooke. Brooke had a flair for the dramatic, and apparently, that included renting out a section of a trendy club downtown. Cindy scanned the room, trying to keep her head clear despite the music pounding in her ears. Her friends were scattered around, some on the dance floor, others mingling near the bar. Brooke was at the center of it all, laughing loudly as she handed out shots to anyone who came within arm's reach. Cindy, Brooke called, spotting her from across the room. Bride-to-be, get over here. Cindy sighed but made her way over, knowing Brooke wouldn't let her off the hook. The moment she reached the group, a shot glass was thrust into her hand. Just one, Cindy said firmly, though she doubted anyone could hear her over the music. She downed the shot quickly, grimacing as the alcohol burned its way down her throat. "That's my girl." Brooke cheered, throwing an arm around her shoulder. "Now, let's get you out there and dancing." "Maybe later," Cindy replied, gently prying herself free. "I need some air first." Brooke pouted but didn't press the issue, turning her attention to another friend. Cindy slipped through the crowd, weaving her way to the balcony at the back of the club. The fresh air was a welcome relief, and she leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights. Back at the apartment, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't like him to worry. Cindy had never given him a reason to doubt her, but tonight felt different. He chalked it up to pre-wedding jitters, but the nagging thought wouldn't go away. He checked his phone, debating whether to text her. He didn't want to come across as clingy or overbearing, especially after their earlier conversation. But as the hours ticked by and the silence stretched on, he found himself typing out a simple message. "Hope you're having fun. Let me know when you're on your way home." He stared at the screen for a moment before hitting send. The message delivered, but no reply came. On the balcony, Cindy's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, smiling faintly when she saw Alex's name. She wanted to text him back, to reassure him that everything was fine, but Brooke appeared before she could type a response. "There you are," Brooke exclaimed, dragging her back inside. "You're not getting out of this, bride-to-be." Cindy let herself be pulled along, the text forgotten as the night carried her further from the man waiting for her at home. By the time the clock struck 2, Alex was pacing the living room. His texts had gone unanswered, and his calls went straight to voicemail. He told himself not to panic. Cindy had probably just lost track of time. But as the minutes turned into hours, his trust began to feel like a weight pressing down on his chest. When the sound of keys jingling reached his ears, Alex froze. The door opened, and Cindy stumbled inside, her cheeks flushed and her hair slightly disheveled. "Hey," she said, her voice overly bright. "You're still up?" Alex crossed his arms, trying to keep his voice steady. "You didn't answer any of my messages." Cindy winced, pulling her phone from her pocket. "I'm sorry. My phone died, and I didn't realize. It was so loud and I just—" "Did something happen?" he interrupted, his eyes searching hers. "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "It was just a party, Alex. Nothing happened." He wanted to believe her, needed to believe her. But as she stood there, avoiding his gaze, a seed of doubt took root in his mind, one that would prove impossible to uproot. The sound of the door creaking open jolted Alex awake. He had fallen asleep on the couch, his phone still clutched in his hand, with the last unanswered text to Cindy glowing faintly on the screen. He rubbed his eyes and glanced at the clock. It was past 3 in the morning. Cindy stepped inside quietly, trying to avoid making noise, but the late hour and her disheveled appearance didn't escape Alex's notice. Her hair was a mess, her jacket draped loosely over one arm, and she carried herself with an odd combination of exhaustion and tension. "Hey," Alex called softly, sitting up. His voice was steady, but there was a trace of concern woven into it. "You're back late." Cindy froze for a moment, as if caught off guard by his presence, before quickly recovering. "Yeah, it got long. Brooke had too many plans, you know how she gets?" Alex nodded, watching her closely. "How was it? The party?" Cindy hesitated, looking down as she slipped off her shoes. "Fine," she said shortly, not offering anything more. "Just fine." Alex pressed gently. Her one-word answer didn't sit right with him. Usually, Cindy would come home from outings with a whirlwind of stories, eager to recount every ridiculous detail. Tonight, there was none of that spark, just an odd distance. "Yeah, just fine." Her tone was clipped, almost defensive. Without meeting his eyes, she walked past him toward the bedroom. "I'm exhausted. Let's talk tomorrow." Alex watched her retreat, a knot forming in his stomach. Something was off, he couldn't deny it. But he also didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe she was just tired, overwhelmed by the looming wedding. He tried to convince himself of that as he lay back down on the couch, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, Alex woke up early. The apartment was quiet, the air heavy with a strange stillness that felt unfamiliar. He got up and made coffee, the mundane routine grounding him as his mind replayed the events of the night before. Cindy emerged from the bedroom an hour later, still in her pajamas. Her hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and she had dark circles under her eyes, as though she hadn't slept much either. She gave him a quick, strained smile before heading straight for her phone, which had been charging on the counter. "Morning," Alex said, trying to keep his tone light. "Morning," she replied without looking at him, her eyes glued to the screen. Her fingers moved quickly as she typed out a message, and then another, her expression unreadable. Alex sipped his coffee, watching her carefully. "So, about last night. Everything okay?" "Yeah, fine," she said, not looking up. "That's the second time you've said fine, but you don't really seem fine." He set his mug down, leaning against the counter. "Did something happen at the party?" "No, Alex." Her voice was sharper now, defensive. "Nothing happened. Can we not do this?" "Do what?" he asked, his brow furrowing. "I'm just trying to figure out what's going on." "You're acting different?" "I'm not acting different," she snapped, finally meeting his eyes. Her expression was hard, almost daring him to keep pushing. Alex held up his hands in surrender. "But, I'm sorry. I'll drop it." Cindy exhaled sharply and turned away, retreating to the living room with her phone still in hand. She sat on the couch, curling her legs beneath her as she stared at the screen, typing occasionally. Alex stayed in the kitchen, feeling a growing unease settle over him like a heavy blanket. As the day wore on, Cindy's behavior didn't improve. She was jumpy, her phone never leaving her side. Every time it buzzed, she'd glance at it quickly, her expression flickering with something Alex couldn't quite read before she tilted the screen away from him. When she wasn't on her phone, she avoided Alex altogether, making excuses to stay busy or leaving the room whenever he tried to start a conversation. By the afternoon, Alex couldn't ignore the nagging suspicion gnawing at him. This wasn't normal. Cindy had never been the type to hide things from him, or at least he had always believed that. But today, there was a wall between them that hadn't been there before, and Alex didn't know how to break through it. He decided to test the waters during lunch. As they sat across from each other at the small kitchen table, Alex forced himself to sound casual. "Any plans for today? We still need to finalize the playlist for the reception." Cindy barely looked up from her plate. "I'll get to it later." "You've been on your phone all morning," Alex said, keeping his tone light. "Anything I should know about? Wedding stuff?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "Just Brooke being Brooke. She's still hungover and sending me memes about last night." Alex smiled faintly, but the explanation felt too simple, too rehearsed. Cindy wasn't usually this curt with him, and the way she avoided eye contact only added to his unease. "Cindy," he said after a long silence, his voice softer now. "If something's bothering you—" "Alex, stop," she interrupted, her tone firm. "I'm fine. Can you please just let it go?" He leaned back in his chair, hurt flashing across his face. "I'm not trying to interrogate you. I'm just worried." "Well, you don't need to be," she said flatly, standing up and taking her plate to the sink. "I have things under control." Alex watched her walk away, his stomach twisting into knots. He didn't know what was worse, the possibility that something had happened at the party, or the realization that Cindy didn't feel she could tell him about it. By evening, Alex was at his breaking point. Cindy's behavior hadn't changed, and the tension between them was palpable. She spent most of the day buried in her phone or pretending to be busy with wedding preparations, but Alex couldn't shake the feeling that she was avoiding him. When she finally sat down on the couch that night, Alex took a deep breath and joined her. "Cindy," he said gently, "we need to talk." She stiffened, her eyes fixed on the television. "About what?" "About whatever's going on," he said, his voice steady but firm. "I know something's wrong. I don't know what it is, but I can feel it." Cindy didn't respond right away. Her hands tightened around her phone, and for a moment, Alex thought she might actually open up. But then she stood up abruptly, her jaw set. "I'm going to bed." "Cindy." "Good night, Alex," she said firmly, cutting him off as she walked into the bedroom and shut the door behind her. Alex sat there in stunned silence, his chest heavy with a mix of frustration and hurt. The woman he was supposed to marry in 2 days was slipping away from him, and he didn't know how to stop it. The morning light streamed into the apartment, a harsh contrast to the weight that had settled over Alex's chest. The wedding was just a day away, and the tension between him and Cindy felt like a thick fog they couldn't escape. She had retreated into herself, her phone seemingly glued to her hand, while Alex wrestled with a growing sense of unease he couldn't shake. As he moved through his morning routine, his thoughts were a tangle of doubts and questions. He opened the bathroom cabinet to grab his razor when something unfamiliar caught his eye. Nestled behind a pack of cotton swabs was a small rectangular box with bold letters that made his heart stop. Pregnancy test. Alex's hands trembled as he reached for it, pulling it out carefully. The box was open, and inside was a used test. He hesitated for a moment, his breath catching in his throat, before looking at the result. 2 faint pink lines stared back at him. Pregnant. For a moment his mind went blank. A mix of emotions surged through him, confusion, hope, and a flicker of happiness that was quickly overshadowed by a cold dread. If Cindy was pregnant, why hadn't she told him? Why had she been acting so distant and strange? The timeline didn't add up, and the doubts that had been gnawing at him now roared to life. He walked out of the bathroom, clutching the test in his hand, and found Cindy sitting at the kitchen table, her phone once again occupying her attention. Her head snapped up when she heard him enter, her expression shifting from surprise to something unreadable as she noticed what he was holding. "What's this?" Alex asked, his voice steady but tight. He held up the test. Cindy's face paled, and for a moment, she looked like a cornered animal. "Alex, I was going to tell you," she said quickly, standing up. "I wanted it to be a surprise." "A surprise?" His tone sharpened, disbelief cutting through his words. "Cindy, we're getting married tomorrow. How long were you planning to wait?" She bit her lip, glancing away. "I thought it would be a nice moment, you know? At the reception or something." Alex stared at her, searching her face for sincerity, but her explanation didn't sit right with him. The Cindy he knew wouldn't hide something this significant. She would have been ecstatic, eager to share the news the moment she found out. And her recent behavior, distant, secretive, didn't align with the joy of someone about to start a family. "You're lying," he said, his voice low but firm. "This doesn't make sense." Cindy's eyes widened, her posture stiffening. "Alex, I'm not lying. Why would I lie about something like this?" "Because something's wrong," he shot back. "You've been acting strange since the party. And now this? I don't buy it." He paused, his chest heaving. "Whose is it, Cindy?" Her face twisted in indignation. "What kind of question is that?" "It's yours, Alex." But the hesitation in her voice, the flicker of panic in her eyes, betrayed her. Alex felt like the ground was shifting beneath him, the foundation of trust they'd built over 3 years crumbling in an instant. "I want a DNA test," he said, his tone colder than he intended. "I need to know the truth." Cindy recoiled as if he'd slapped her. "A DNA test? Alex, how can you say that? Don't you trust me?" "I did," he said, his voice breaking. "I trusted you completely. But right now, I don't know what to believe." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them was deafening, filled with the weight of accusations unspoken and wounds that couldn't yet be healed. Cindy finally nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. "Fine," she said quietly. "If that's what it takes, we'll do the test." The days following the test were a blur of tension and unspoken resentment. Cindy kept her distance, and Alex threw himself into wedding preparations, though his heart wasn't in it. He wanted to believe her, to convince himself that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that his worst fears were about to be confirmed. When the results finally came in, Alex opened the envelope with shaking hands. Cindy stood across from him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, her face pale. The words on the paper were cold and clinical, but they hit him like a physical blow. The child wasn't his. Alex's knees buckled, and he sank into a chair, the paper slipping from his fingers. He looked up at Cindy, his face a mask of shock and betrayal. "It's not mine," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Cindy didn't respond immediately. She stared at him, her lips trembling, and then tears welled in her eyes. "Alex, I'm so sorry," she choked out. "Who?" His voice was louder now, filled with anger and desperation. "Who is it, Cindy?" She broke down then, covering her face with her hands as sobs racked her body. Alex felt like he'd been punched in the gut. The woman he was about to marry, the woman he had trusted with his heart and his future, had betrayed him in the worst possible way. "You didn't mean for it to happen," he repeated bitterly. "You cheated on me 2 days before our wedding, and now you're carrying his child?" Cindy sank to her knees in front of him, her hands clutching at his. "Alex, please," she begged. "It was a mistake. I love you. I want to be with you. We can get past this. Get past this?" Alex yanked his hands away, standing up so quickly the chair toppled over behind him. "You lied to me. You were going to let me marry you, thinking this was my child. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I didn't know how to tell you," she cried. "I was scared, Alex. I didn't want to lose you." "Well, congratulations," he said coldly. "You've lost me anyway." The rest of the day passed in a haze. Alex packed a bag and left the apartment, unable to bear Cindy's presence any longer. He drove aimlessly for hours, his mind racing with everything that had happened. The love he had once felt for Cindy was now tangled with a pain so deep it felt like it might consume him. By the time he returned to his friend Jason's house, where he planned to stay for the night, he felt utterly hollow. The wedding was off. His future with Cindy, the life they had built together, was gone. All that remained was the weight of her betrayal and the shattered pieces of his heart.